So another thing that comes into play, along with Birth of a Nation, is the Russian Revolution. And the Russian Revolution inspires all manner of fear in the population as a result of its radical agenda, which had a big effect upon America First.
I can fully understand that. Absolutely. It's frightened the entire world. Welcome to the United States of Amnesia. You found us. Thank you. We are the podcast that reminds us of what we have forgotten. It is often said that history repeats itself. Mark Twain allegedly said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Ecclesiastes probably said it best in chapter 1, verse 9, quote, "Everything that has been will be again. Everything that has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun," close quote. But over time, many topics have become clouded by biases and oversimplifications, or have become mythologized and now are misunderstood. Misunderstanding means learning the wrong lessons from history, perhaps, or even learning nothing at all. And that can leave us poorly prepared for history's next rhyme. Your hosts are Marshall Newman, Mike Mendenhall, and myself, Blake Henke. In this podcast, we will cover topics of history, politics, and religion, and how they interact, and also how they relate to modern-day events and themes. We will try to cut through the biases, oversimplifications, and myths to learn better lessons from the past and to see what they can tell us about the present and maybe even the future. Our second episode will pick up where we left off last time, with the development and evolution of America First ideology from the Russian Revolution to 1927. Before we return to the Russian Revolution, I will simply note that 1927 was not only the year that Charles Lindbergh, a significant figure associated with the term America First, crossed the Atlantic, but it was also the year that the son of a German immigrant was arrested at a Ku Klux Klan rally in Queens, New York. This German immigrant had made a living in North America operating a brothel during the Yukon Gold Rush, and his son's name was Fred Trump. I mean, it's obvious that the Russian Revolution frightened the entire world, but I had no idea that it had any impact on America First.
Well, what it did was it frightened people about radical attacks and magnified them, which were occurring shortly after the war. For example, there was a huge bombing in Wall Street right after World War I, in which the House of Morgan, the banking concern, was targeted. Several people were killed in Wall Street. It was essentially they had brought a cart and pulled kind of like something not unlike what Timothy McVeigh did in Oklahoma City. They basically had this bomb that went off and fired.
There's a famous photo of the crater in the street, I think,
yes,
or something.
And they basically spent an entire day and night repairing most of the damage. There was still, if you go by the House of Morgan, you can still see the shrapnel damage to the building, which they left up as kind of like battle scars.
It was big. September 16th, 1920, killed 30 people instantly. 8 others died later. 143 seriously injured. And total number injured was in the hundreds.
Yes.
And the explosion was big enough to blow cars over on their sides. There's a famous picture of it there. So
yes,
that was big.
So in addition to this, there were also bombs that were sent through the post office to various prominent people. One of them was A. Mitchell Palmer, who was Wilson's attorney general. He lived across the street from Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, by the way, on N Street. And bomb went off, and it was meant for the attorney general. It did not injure him but it did destroy the house. This led to what's called the Palmer Raids, where radicals were rounded up. Now, suffice it to say, the 14th Amendment says you are an American citizen if you are born here or you are naturalized. That's what makes you an American citizen. And that makes you entitled to the due process of law. In this case, people who were foreign-born had their citizenship stripped from them. They were put on boats and they were sent back to their countries of origin. Emma Goldman, for example, who was a famous radical, she was actually sent back to she was born in Imperial Russia. She was sent back to what became the Soviet Union. And eventually she made her way back to Canada, not finding the workers' paradise all that great. Anarchists were widely seen as this huge criminal element that was going around, not only inspiring strikes but also planting bombs here.
And an inherently foreign element.
An inherently foreign element, and like another example, Sacco and Vanzetti. There is a case of Sacco and Vanzetti, who are Italian anarchists who were accused of being part of a robbery of a shoe factory, and essentially they were convicted. The judge said at the beginning, "I'm going to get those anarchist bastards for their political beliefs," whether or not the merits of the case were sufficient to convict them.
And they ended up in the electric chair in 1927.
Yes. So there was Americanism was meant to counter these sorts of radical notions that are becoming more and more prominent and getting a lot of attention in the press in the 1920s.
And of course, it didn't help that Sacco and Vanzetti were Italian
and anarchists. So
you've got that foreign and anarchist connection.
Central casting for the threat.
What the boogeyman is.
What the boogeyman is.
Yeah, right.
What is taking you away from this idealized, wonderful world where America was great and people, again, useful work, simple pleasures, and everybody working in harmony and living in harmony because they're all
the same person.
So, I mean, it's absurd, but you still see it resonate today.
It still exists today.
It still exists today. I mean, I think that today people, because we are a more diverse country, and nobody's going to be going around screaming WASP rights or anything like that.
We're not far from that.
We're really
not very far from that at all. But that's a whole different thing.
You're not gonna go and say Catholics or the whole anti-Catholic thing is probably a dead letter here, though.
Well, yeah, but I mean the thing about it is with and I think this feeds into America First too, is like you're saying, it feeds on a nostalgia for some time in the past, right?
Yes.
But to all get together and agree on being America Firsters, you in no way have to agree when that magic time was or what it actually involved.
And it probably didn't exist.
It never existed.
Probably didn't exist.
But what works in your favor if you're going to do this is you don't have to worry about whether it ever really existed.
You just have to have people believe it.
You don't have to put a date on it. You don't have to put a characteristic to it. It was just better somehow in those days, based on everybody being the same.
Everybody being the same.
It seems to me is the common factor.
Or people being docile and accepting their fate in life.
Right.
Willingly.
With people like me dominant over. Yeah, right.
Yes, with people like me dominant.
Over people not like me. So, right.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's the thing about it. So, but anyway, so anarchism.
Hold on. Let me interject here. So, 1920.
Yeah.
Let's zoom out for a second. You've got women's suffrage for the first time.
Yes.
You have prohibition beginning.
Yes.
We're in the wake of the Russian Revolution, so the rise of
anti-radical thought.
Well, but socialism and communistic thoughts and theories are spreading throughout the world, and they're threats. They are legitimate threats, and there were parties in the United States even that were espousing them.
I mean, the Socialist Party had reached its high water mark by about 1912 under Eugene V. Debs. But Debs is going to be running for president and considered a major player in 1920. He's going to be running from prison because he's been imprisoned by Wilson because he spoke out against conscription. And Wilson is, even though the war is over, Wilson is adamant he is going to stay in jail and he's going to serve his full sentence. Harding, who is a Republican and not as given to being considered as progressive-minded as Wilson, is going to pardon Debs once he is elected.
And you mentioned that Debs ran for president from jail.
Yes, in 1920.
Famously, he did,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like there are highly sought after political objects,
Right.
buttons that basically refer not to Debs but to his prisoner number as who you're voting for.
But see, the thing about this is, right, when you look at it, again, it's a bunch of boogeymen.
Yeah,
And the reason I'm saying this is, Blake, you're mentioning communism, socialism, like that, right? Well, yeah, there was a Communist Party in the United States. There was a Socialist Party, which was bigger than the Communist Party. But neither one of them was ever very big.
they were never significant.
These were
enough.
never significant political movements in the United States, right? Trade unionism was bigger, right?
Yeah.
But that's not, people get that confused in their minds. That's not socialism, and certainly not communism, right?
Yeah.
It is workers' rights within a capitalist system. That's what trade unionism is trying to get, worker benefits in a capitalist system. People don't understand that very well, I think, a lot of the time, because they cartoonify it into being just a type of socialism or communism.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the point just is these were not big movements. These weren't something that really objectively you really needed to be all that very scared of when you really thought about it. Americans didn't really want either of those things, didn't support them, let alone anarchism. There really weren't a lot of American anarchists running around. But, they set a bomb off in Wall Street, right? There were extreme things that happened. And there's your boogeyman. There's your thing you can point to and
People
just say,
throwing bombs.
that's not America, right?
Right.
People that don't do that are America. We need to get together and preserve America.
Yes.
America first, right?
So in 1920, we have another election. And this was a very contentious election where at the beginning, say the year before, everybody knew who were going to be the two candidates for the two major parties. Theodore Roosevelt was going to be the Republican nominee, and Woodrow Wilson was going to try for an unprecedented third term as the Democratic nominee,
Which was not yet unconstitutional.
which was not yet unconstitutional. And so Roosevelt dies in 1919, and Wilson's stroke. Wilson stayed in the game longer than he should have, which might sound familiar, because his health was not up for it. But he was constantly encouraged, particularly by his wife, to continue to seek out this third term to cement his legacy, which included things like the League of Nations. So,
Well, and there are those who argue that she was the one making all the policies, that he was not capable of it anymore.
yes,
Because of his stroke, right?
Yes. And nobody really understood just how sick Wilson was until they actually saw him at Harding's inauguration in 1921.
And the role of the vice president in such a situation still wasn't clearly understood, right? In the
There
way it
was-
is now.
There was no 25th Amendment.
There was no
at the
25th Amendment, right?
that basically people could say the president is incapacitated.
Right.
We need to basically the rules of succession applied. So we're in like a constitutional.
There's a concern that if the vice president asserts his authority because the president is incompetent, that's a coup.
Yes, exactly.
That was a very strong worry of that time, that you really couldn't do that because it would look like a coup, right? So you wind up with him staying in office, even though he had a terrible stroke and was quite ill.
Yes, but what we end up with is Republicans, Harding and Calvin Coolidge are the president and vice presidential nominees for the Republicans. Cox and Franklin Roosevelt are the nominees for the Democrats. Now, in this election, two groups embrace the notion of America first here. The first is the Republicans, and they have their own version of America first. And this version is not about preparedness or protectionism, but it also gets us towards this vision of an America that conformed with the mythology that people had found so enticing and popular as a result of World War I, no matter how inconsistent this is with reality.
So let's just be clear. So the World War I experience had been a bitter one,
Yes.
right? We felt we hadn't gotten much out of it. Our participation.
We had been scammed.
We've been scammed by the Europeans.
We had been scammed by the Europeans.
Them and their old-fashioned dirty ways.
Yes.
Nefarious ways.
That we
Right.
pure-minded Americans are unable to appreciate.
So let's not do that again.
Yes.
And when you talked about preparedness, because we're not going to do that again, we don't need military preparedness,
Yeah.
right? We just need to stay out of things like we should have in the first place.
Stick to our hemisphere.
Stick to our hemisphere. So we're back to that.
Yes.
The World War I experience sucked. Let's not do that again. Let's go back to the way we were.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the 20s, I mean, the thing about the 20s is people think about flappers, people think about going out to parties at Jay Gatsby's on Long Island, and people kind of looking forward to this sort of like radical future, or radical present. This is not really where people's heads were. People were looking backward more so than they were looking forward. And when they looked forward, they were generally appalled by what they saw there.
So thoroughly modern Millie is not necessarily historically
No,
accurate?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Particularly
The Roaring Twenties? No, not so much.
Well, it would be sort of like hippies in the 60s. Everybody thinks everybody's a hippie in the 60s.
Right.
And really, you're talking about a small segment of the population. I mean, most women are looking to get married, and this is their career goal. And most guys are looking for like the family and the house in the suburbs during the 60s.
And it's largely still largely a rural country in 1920. Well, 40% rural by population anyway.
People are not protesting.
Right.
They're basically in university. They're basically going to school.
Right.
There's a tiny minority, but they're the people that get. And the same is true. I mean, the flapper and the bootlegger are certainly significant figures in the 1920s, but that's not what most people were doing here. Most people are not going to wild parties. They're not consuming illegal liquor and speakeasies.
They're not the cool people that go downtown on Saturday night for fun.
Yes.
Right.
They don't hang out with gangsters.
Right. All that kind of thing.
This is if you look at Gatsby, you get some sense of what's going on in America, and this is kind of introduced with Tom Buchanan, and he comes out and says he's concerned about threats to traditional racial order. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empires by this man Goddard? He asks when Nick Carraway comes to visit. So this is actually based on a real book, and this is a common concern in both rural and urban America. African Americans becoming too powerful in the process, overwhelming the traditional white ruling order. And then also in The Great Gatsby, we have Meyer Wolfsheim, Jewish gangster, again based on a real person, Arnold Rothstein, who has an odd taste in cufflinks, if anybody remembers. And this is about the corrupting influence of recently arrived immigrants. Wolfsheim is the man who fixed the World Series. Baseball. He's corrupted baseball, America's pastime. Isn't that awful? So which is what
Rothstein actually did.
Yes, which is what Rothstein actually did.
In 1919, right?
Yes.
The Black Sox scandal.
Yes.
Right. Yep.
But, and Rothstein is also Jewish, but, libel laws being what they were, Fitzgerald wanted to put somebody in there, so he creates this fictional guy who supposedly, it's rumor, but it's based off of Arnold Rothstein.
Right.
So the other America that is out there is the one that's captured by Sinclair Lewis, and we will come back to Sinclair Lewis in the subsequent episode. But he kind of speaks most to our present era and also that of the 1920s in certain ways. Here we see the world of the small town as crushing to characters. Science is questioned. Medicine is questioned. Businessmen are leading lives that are meaningless. And the virtues of the small town is built around this sort of idealized existence.
So when you talk about Sinclair Lewis, is he reflecting something more along the lines of what the Democratic vision was? And what I have in mind is that, the Republican vision was keep out of Europe, keep out of foreign entanglements. The Republican one was small town virtues as well. Okay, so they have that. And then the business of America is business. When Coolidge becomes president, Silent Cal just stays out of the way. He lets let business run its course and do it always knows what's best to do, right, for the country, which eventually leads to the Great Depression, but that's a story for another time.
Yeah.
Sinclair Lewis is also expressing the Republican point of view. What
he
then?
He is expressing a view that runs counter to the myths that the Republicans are spouting.
So my question is he reflecting the Democratic point of view of the time?
In 1920, what was the Democratic perspective of America?
Well, the Democratic Party was a strange hybrid that came up and developed after the Civil War, in which you had the South, the rural South, with all of these traditional values that would not be necessarily adverse to some of the positions by the Republicans, other than the fact that the South regarded Republicans as having horns and hooves and so forth. So they supported a kind of traditional, very racist view of society with the racial hierarchy. That's one wing. And the other wing is all immigrants living in cities. And they are essentially opposed to, there's no, the only ideology that they kind of have that unites them is opposition to the Republicans, and at times a belief that you can use the federal government for good, which kind of comes in with Wilson. But you don't want it doing too much good and the wrong kind of good, because this could alienate the South. I mean, oddly enough, you have this weird division in which the Republicans are suspicious of immigrants, and they largely at least provide lip service to racial equality and African Americans being able to enjoy their political rights as guaranteed under the Constitution. And then you have Democrats who are opposed to racial equality in many cases, particularly in the South, and being very pro-immigrant and being made up of all these urban-dwelling immigrants and their political machines like Tammany Hall that back them. So the Democratic Party, as we will see, is very, very schizophrenic in terms of what it actually believes. I think the Republicans have a more coherent sense of what they want to achieve and their vision for America than the Democrats do. And it's going to be that way really until Franklin Roosevelt comes along.
But both ascribe to some form of nostalgic view of an earlier time.
It's more pronounced with the Republicans.
That was better.
It's more pronounced with the Republicans, but let's come back to this.
Okay.
And the wing of the Democratic Party that is Southern and racist.
Okay. The Dixiecrats.
The Dixiecrats. Although they weren't known as that then.
Blue Dog Democrats?
Yeah, well, I mean, all right, so true story. When I was growing up, my grandmother, when we were talking about days gone past, my grandmother told me that the Republican Party was held in such low esteem that there would be scenes in which people would gather around the dying relative who had fought in the Civil War, and he would basically forced them all to raise their hands and pledge never to vote for Republican, because this was the party of Lincoln. This was and I believe this was real. And I think it actually happened even in our own family to some extent, where you had those kinds of strong opinions about party loyalty that persisted in the South. Now, that would be the part that would have this sort of nostalgic view of things. It would be very easy to pinpoint the period that they are nostalgic for. It is the period before the South, before slaves were given their freedom, and
the antebellum South
was the idealized,
the perfect time
for everybody, and everybody lived in big, huge houses that had big, huge columns in them, even though they didn't.
Right.
But the reason that people didn't have those was that the Yankees done burned them all down, But so there is that idealized position that they had there, but let's talk about 1920 here, because this is where we actually see the slogan coming back with Harding and Coolidge here. And again, this is all about nostalgia, a vanished America that was of course white, Anglo-Saxon, and Protestant, and as we'll see, very much Protestant as being a huge emphasis on this. The changes that are coming on in the 1920s are very much a product of the cities. Now, 1920, along with being an election year, it's also a year where the census was collected. And this is the first time where urban dwellers, people living in towns, outnumber rural dwellers. So it's 60-40. So this is the first time that this has happened. And this is going to play a role in this sort of cultural dominance that we're seeing out of this urban environment. So we see bootlegging, which thanks to Prohibition is going on, and this is very much a product of the cities, although other relatives have told me in the 20s bootlegging was fairly popular out in the rural parts of the country as well. It wasn't quite as... You wouldn't go to a speakeasy, you'd go to what was called the Blind Pig, and you would drink something that, if not correctly distilled, could blind you, but people were seeking all sorts of thrills.
There's a long tradition of moonshining.
Yes, that's exactly what we're talking... That's what was served at Blind Pigs.
Right.
And then other things that happened, since you brought up Thoroughly Modern Millie, white slavery was something that was supposedly going on, as organized prostitution was referred to. There were corrupt political organizations like Tammany Hall that held sway in this environment. Different stranger religions are prevailing. African Americans who are kind of this is the time of the Harlem Renaissance, which we now look at as a great creative time, but Harlem's also seen as this sort of cultural threat to the rest of America. Then you have, and they're given more freedom than what was good for them in some minds, threatening the so-called white race, which didn't necessarily include people that are now assumed to be members of this. This would be people from Southern and Eastern Europe. This would be people who were Jews, people who were Catholics. Sexual perversion of all kinds were commonly practiced in cities, with no community standards to keep people in check. And basic humanity of the foreign-born was questioned, as we see today. All in the name of preserving, first in America, that was generally poorly defined, but people seemed to know it when they saw it. That was kind of what America First meant.
So the flourishing of culture in Harlem was in itself a threat.
Jazz
because
music.
It was creating new ways of thinking about what American culture were, right? Or it was adding to the American cultural milieu, or whatever you want to say, right? I mean, that was already too much.
Jazz was rap music.
Yeah.
Of its day.
Right.
Like there were all sorts of sexual innuendos which most people don't pick up on now. that were quite blatant at the time.
Right.
And again, you're why are you listening to this horrible music? Of course, this is like the one of the few real. I mean, if you're a real like America Firster, the idea that here's one of the truly genuine cultural innovations that are done by Americans for Americans, jazz music, and it's like widely castigated as being this sort of perverted, unnatural.
Right. So that's because to America Firsters, it was being done by the wrong. It comes from the wrong kind of American, right?
Yes,
not the right kind of American.
And actually, once you get into like the 30s with swing music, that kind of like makes things okay. But you know,
it's crossover music.
It's crossover music. This is it is one thing to have stuff done by Muddy Waters. It's another thing to have them done by Artie Shaw.
Yeah. So let me ask you then. I just want to pull that thread a little bit further then. So if I was a white person in the 20s who enjoyed jazz, and there was such a thing.
Yes.
So to an America Firster, am I like a cultural traitor?
You're kind of lost because you're probably hanging out in speakeasies, you're probably drinking too much, you're probably playing around with women,
right?
You probably have dubious moral standards,
right?
So you're a lost cause for, say, like the sort of people who go to Mary Pickford movies and like to contemplate this lost, wonderful world that we need to bring back here. We need to return to traditional values and traditional virtues.
So I'm like a hippie in the 60s.
Yeah.
If I like jazz in the 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm with you.
Like they like this is like acid rock.
Right. Right.
You're probably taking drugs drugs in the sense of alcohol.
Right.
Alcohol is a drug, but there was also like ideas that you would be doing drugs as well as going to the speakeasies. It's like, dancing leads to drinking, leads to drugs, leads to sex, leads to, that kind of mentality.
The end of society, yeah.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Moving on, America First is also a slogan that's adopted by the Ku Klux Klan, and so we are talking about, when I was kind of dancing around this issue when we were talking about the Democrats, but the Klan becomes a political force in the 1920s and not in the places that you think it's going to be. People popularly are going to assume that the Klan is going around doing all sorts of illegal actions in the South and terrorizing African Americans. It is not that at all entirely the case, because the Klan manages to gain control over states like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Oregon, and even though they don't gain control over these other states, they are very much a force for wrong in the places where they had a presence. So having somebody like Fred Trump at a Klan rally in Queens, New York, that is not considered that odd to have a presence like that. That's why we bring him up at the introduction here. But because it's not necessarily all about race, which is kind of what people normally associate the Klan with. They still, the Republican Party might have shared some of the values, but the Republican Party is still playing lip service to racial equality before the law. The Klan wants an end to lots of the government experimentation that occurred during the progressive era of, say, Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Even though a lot of this stuff a lot of these reforms are being done by middle class, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, somehow or the other, they were characterized as the products of foreigners and dangerous foreign experiments, again linking them to the kind of anti-radicalism that was very much a part of what happened after the Russian Revolution. Catholicism and its growing acceptance as Catholic immigrants advance, generally in large cities, is a concern, particularly within the Democratic Party, as we'll see in 1924. But this is actually something that the Klan is against. And then any prominent Jewish person, that is something the Klan is against. The Klan is also in smaller communities going around and enforcing its own view of morality. So if an adulterous couple is understood to be carrying on, they will go in and try to provide counseling of using probably a stick to make their points there. So these are things that are going on. We're also seeing attempts to restrict immigration coming up through both views of America First. This had been on the agenda. It had been generally sponsored by kind of old line WASP Republicans, like Henry Cabot Lodge. He was constantly sponsoring all of these attempts to restrict immigration. Again, these were not very successful. In 1921, we see the first attempts at restricting immigration. In 1924, we really see the notions of America First and immigration as playing a significant part.
There was an act in 1917, the Immigration Act of 1917, which was the first large one since the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, if the internet is to be believed.
Yes.
And in 1917, that imposed literacy tests on immigrants, created new categories of inadmissible persons, and barred immigration from the Asia-Pacific region. So that was 1917.
But Asia-Pacific is always
right
that's always being banned.
Right. And then 1921 tried to address the large influx of Southern and Eastern Europeans.
Yes.
Right. So it's restricting their immigration. Right.
Yes.
And then that brings us to 1924
with Johnson Reed.
Yeah.
And in this case, this is what makes this significant. It goes much further than anything before. It limited European immigration to 165,000 people, or an 80% reduction in the average totals before 1914. A border patrol is also created to kind of enforce the bill. There is no limit on Latin American immigration. This is not yet seen as a threat. And clearly the idea...
Well, and I think that has to do with, kind of the Monroe Doctrine view of the Western Hemisphere was our hemisphere.
Yeah.
So those people were coming from our area, our sphere of influence.
Yes.
Right, our area. So that was kind of our quote-unquote empire.
Yeah,
right?
and
so you wanted them to come and go, I suppose.
They were seen as still second-class citizens, but second-class citizens that could be counted on to be docile and not assert any rights or anything.
Right.
So the idea behind this bill is to protect U.S. homogeneity. Now, it's interesting to look at kind of documents and speeches that are done at the time. So when I was doing the research for this, I looked at kind of Coolidge's speeches. And Coolidge is basically talking about making sure that the right sort of person comes to America. And that is what this is about. He also talks about racial equality, too, which not that anybody's really doing anything about at this point. But
what does he say about racial equality?
He basically wants to see African Americans be allowed to exercise their full political rights throughout the country.
Okay.
That is his idea of racial equality.
Okay.
It is just that. It is not social. It's not like you're going to be able to rent homes where you want to. It's not. There's equal accommodations are not on the agenda. It is you have the right to enjoy these political rights, which you're not being allowed
But you're not socially equal.
You're not socially equal.
Right.
And there are certain areas of the law that we're not going to really get into. But we are going to, Coolidge was very much a proponent, and this was a Republican position, really until Nixon, about political equality. What we see happening in this period in 1924 is we see the Klan's approach to the America First demonstrated in the chaotic 1924 Democratic Convention. Now, we're used to going to looking at conventions on TV, if we bother at all, because they are kind of snooze fests, to being with the nominee chosen on the first ballot. Well, this took 103 ballots to nominate someone, and the reason is that the Klan element of the Democratic Party backed former Treasury Secretary William Gibbs McAdoo. McAdoo is Woodrow Wilson's son-in-law, but he's also the Klan's preferred candidate. And the Klan also was able to defeat an anti-Klan plank in the convention platform. This was very much a demonstration of their ability. In the end, the Klan meant that a non-entity, John W. Davis of West Virginia, was chosen as the nominee. And just to add some luster to it, William Jennings Bryan's brother was chosen as his running mate. The other candidate, the candidate that represented the other wing of the Democratic Party, was Al Smith. And it's funny to think that someone with a name like Al Smith would be seen as a sort of interloper. But he was Catholic. He was anti-prohibition, which was kind of a litmus test for Americanism at the time. But Al Smith would be back. He was very much a self-made man, but he was very much identified with big city boss politics as a product of Tammany Hall. He was the first Catholic governor of New York, and he was very much a progressive in a lot of ways, but he was ultimately defeated in this attempt to gain the nomination. So Calvin Coolidge is reelected, and Calvin Coolidge represents a kind of continuation of the politics begun in the 1920 election. You would have writers like Fitzgerald and Lewis, Sinclair Lewis, condemn the complacency, but people liked this. This was a kind of time, particularly if you weren't living on a farm and going bankrupt trying to make a living off of this. This was a good time to be alive here. There was the Coolidge boom that was going on, but
let's talk about that though, the rural problems, right?
Yes,
the Great Depression famously started in 1929 with the Wall Street crash. Except in the rural America, it was already well underway in the 20s.
Yes, 1920s.
Even by the early to mid 20s, there was already a depressed economy in the
yes, I mean when I was a teenager, I was kind of interested in the 1920s. It was kind of like there would be like books and things like that going on. We read The Great Gatsby, and I tell my dad, "Oh, we're studying the 1920s," and I said, "What a wonderful time it was." And Dad said, "Your great-grandparents went bankrupt during this period because they were trying to grow rice out in rural Louisiana, and this was not good because for people who were farming, they had been told to grow as much as they could during World War I. They took on loans that they could not afford, and then when prices collapsed after World War I, they were kind of left high and dry, and there was no solution for this. There was no bailout. There was no concern about this. This sort of happened underground. It was something that people knew about was happening. It was fueling the increased urbanization of America because opportunities with the family farm were sort of evaporating. But this was something that was not necessarily, they did not share. Farmers did not share in the prosperity of the Coolidge years.
So from an American First point of view, things are going the wrong direction, right?
Yep.
Because the yeoman farmer, that whole lifestyle is on the run economically. People are moving to the cities, which are these dens of iniquity.
Yes.
Iniquity, right? So how is that playing out then in the 20s?
It's not playing out. But people are doubling down on these notions that there is a way to bring back, to make America great again, and morally great, and removed from these corrupting influences. That's the mindset that's going on. That's definitely the mindset for someone like Calvin Coolidge.
And that's by going back to small towns and farms?
Yes, which are disappearing.
But at the same time, in the 20s, Coolidge is letting, the titans of industry do whatever they want pretty much, right?
Yes, the business of America is business.
So square that circle for me.
History is not always consistent ideologically.
So to give us an idea of the strength of the Ku Klux Klan in the mid-1920s, it's useful to remember that on August 8th, 1925, the Klan held a major parade in Washington, D.C. Klan spent a great deal of time planning this parade. When they arrived, the press at the time noted that some of their cars had signs and placards on them saying that this car contains 100% Americans. So you can draw your own conclusions about that. The route was along Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, and it went from the U.S. Capitol to the Treasury Building. The Treasury Building is next door to the White House. 30,000 Klansmen and Klanswomen participated in this parade, wearing their full white outfits. Some of them had multicolored outfits for whatever their various ranks and were. They had different state chapters involved and county chapters and whatever. And they did not wear their hoods. They wore their conical hats, but not their hoods. The Klan said, "March proud and show everyone your face. You don't need to hide who you are." So they actually marched in plain view. The parade lasted 3.5 hours, and it was by no means universally popular among D.C. residents, shall we say. There was opposition to it happening. But nonetheless, it drew 150,000 spectators. And it culminated in a rally where the Klan intended to have, their quote-unquote great orators, right, come up and give speeches. However, a storm hit right as they got started, and that kind of broke up all the speech-making, so they didn't get to do that part. Broke up their rally. They didn't get to do that. But the next evening, August 9th, they held a cross-burning and initiation ceremony across the river in Arlington, Virginia. And in this ceremony, they had an 80-foot tall cross with 30-foot crossbeam on it that they burned. They had 200 new inductees into the Klan that they swore in. And that event drew 75,000 attendees. And the local police noted that it was the largest crowd in Arlington, to their knowledge, since the burial of the unknown soldier at the tomb in 1921. So there were Klan parades in 1926 and 1927 as well. Neither of them was as big as the 1925 parade. There also was a D.C. parade in 1928. There may have been parades after that, I don't know. But it's true that Klan membership started to drop off around 1930. But it would surge again. Do you know when?
Civil rights.
It surged again in the 1960s. And why? Because of
civil rights.
The civil rights movement. So that's when the Klan started to come back again.
That's like the third Klan.
It's the second Klan again, but it's a resurgence of that second Klan. It never went away. It stayed around, but it wasn't as popular from about 1930 until the 1960s as it had been in the 1920s.
I would like to close with 1927 before we take up the future career of America First. One event that was very significant, Charles Lindbergh, very handsome guy, very well connected, which is something most people didn't realize, and he only got better connected, flew across the Atlantic, and he became instantly the most famous person on the planet. This was well covered, and Lindbergh was probably, if people had a hero, it was probably him. This is also the year that Fred Trump, son of a German former brothel owner, gets arrested at a clash at a Ku Klux Klan fascist rally in Queens, New York. So at that point, we shall come back to some of these issues
next time.
Next time.
That's it for this episode of the United States of Amnesia. Thank you for listening. We hope you learned something, and we hope you discovered new ways of looking at things you had already heard or thought about, or perhaps hadn't heard about. If you enjoyed it, that's great. If we made you mad, that's okay too. Either way, email us at usa.amnesia@gmail.com and let us know what you think. Also, let us know about anything you think we missed or got wrong. We'd like to know about that too. And of course, please like and subscribe and let your friends and neighbors know about us. We also have a website. It's www.usofamnesia.com. For Marshall, Mike, and myself, till next time.